students, faculty that participated in the rally and invited us. We appreciate you inviting us to that. We hear you as board chair. I hear you. We look forward to working with all of you in the next 5 to 6 months through the session to do what we can to help foster some common sense approach to funding higher education, and we certainly as a board pledge to do that and want to work together as a higher education community to see that we can make as much headway as possible. So thank you for that. With that, Regent Buchanan.
Thank you, Chairman Barrett, and I think the remaining items of our agenda are in the lap of Mr. Dan Villa, and if you were not present yesterday at the Board of Public Ed or the Board of Education meeting, this will be a great opportunity to hear from the governor's office what is, I think, perceived by all of us a fantastic starting point as we head into the legislative process. So, Dan, please give us an overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we could get the PowerPoint up very quickly. Thank you, ma'am. We started the executive budget process sometime in March, sent the requests for the budget submissions, present law adjustments, new proposals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Throughout that process, we were able to focus our efforts on what we find as the real economic engines of Montana. And as the governor has said, the best investment we can make to help create jobs, the jobs of tomorrow, is in education. So we have increased funding for both in Governor Schweitzer's executive budget proposal. We have increased funding for both K-12 and higher ed above last biennium's levels. Now, you've heard a lot of talk about, well, we need to rein in government spending. We need to pull back on it. We need to put ourselves back into some fiscal sanity, is the line you hear a lot. Well, what this chart shows is where we've spent, where the increases have come from 2005 to 2009 in state ongoing spend, or in state spending. You can see there the largest portion of it goes to K-12. We were in 2005. The Supreme Court ruled that the state's K-12 funding formula was not that the formula was unconstitutional, but there was a tremendous adequacy problem. Between 2005 2009, we've invested tens of millions of dollars to remedy that situation, at which point the Supreme Court now finds that we are in compliance with the constitutional requirements placed on us, both as an executive and as a legislature. You see the additional, the second largest bit was higher education. We've managed to keep tuition frozen for the last 4 years at 11 of 14. Before that, we had the college affordability plan. We've made, you can't draw a direct correlation, but we'd like to think that keeping tuition levels down has certainly assisted and spawned some additional student enrollment throughout the university system. And we'd like to make sure that the costs are at a point where they can stay in the system without having to worry about new debt. That's sort of another theme we've heard throughout the last several months. We don't want to mortgage our kids' future. Student debt is mortgaging your students' future. That's why we look forward to everybody voting for our budget. The final two are not related, but corrections. 2004, the Pew Research Center found that Montana was increasing its incarceration rate at one of the highest levels in the nation. Today, they found that we are decreasing our population at one of the highest levels in the nation. Why? Because we are identifying the sources of the violations and we are treating them. If you have a mental illness, we are treating the mental illness rather than locking you up and throwing away the key. If you have an alcohol or other substance abuse issue, we are treating that. We see recidivism rates going down. We see people in their communities getting the treatment they need, getting out and being productive members of society much faster than under the old lock them up and throw away the key. Finally, the final largest bump was the creation of the public defender system. The ACLU and Senator Dan McGee, Republican from Laurel, introduced this bill. So when you look at where the funding increases have been over the last 4 or 5 years, and you look at, quote, reining in excessive government spending, quote unquote, the real question that you have to ask yourself is, what classrooms are you going to close down? How much are you going to increase, or how much more are you going to mortgage our students' future? Who gets out early, and what indigent don't get representation? This slide represents general fund, House Bill 2 increases, proposed increases and substantial decreases in some cases for all agencies across state government. Notice that now this is just House Bill 2. I'm going to be talking about 3 bills today. House Bill 2, House Bill 5, which is the Long Range Building Program, and House Bill 13, which is the Pay Plan. In House Bill 2, 9.99% increase in general fund appropriations for the university system. This chart represents the historical perspective of where we've been with university system funding. This red line represents what our proposed budget would do or reflect with this historical this longitudinal data. As the governor has said over and over, we will continue to increase our investment in education. We should not shortchange our students' future, because we know that an investment in education today prevents a demand in corrections tomorrow, a demand in HHS tomorrow, and spawns economic activity, some of which the students that are developing our technologies today haven't even been thought of. So this is the details section of the proposal. Maybe to start out with, there is a global 4% personal services reduction across all state agencies. That's also true of the university system. Administrative program, as you know, is your OCHI office. Not a lot to report there other than the 4%. It's important to note that that 4% is not in addition to a 7% vacancy savings. The additional vacancy savings that was passed last session is reduced back to previous biennia's level. Witchy-whammy Minnesota Dental, Governor's Post-Secondary Scholarship Program, Quality Educator Loan Forgiveness are all kept at their higher levels. As you know, we had to make the reductions in March to maintain a balanced budget. We are proposing that state special revenue, which is federal special revenue, backfill those portions that were reduced as part of the 17.7.140 reduction, so that we can keep the student assistance program whole. We're further proposing an additional $250,000 in dual enrollment scholarships. We know that the debt load students don't have when they graduate makes them more likely to stay in Montana. Getting a head start is one of the best ways to reduce that debt load, as well as to make sure that they actually enroll. So we are proposing $500,000 for the biennia to pick up where the Lumina grant is now funding for dual enrollment scholarships. However, with this, there are strings. Funding of this, per the language, is contingent upon development of common tuition and fee structures across the Montana University system for dual enrollment courses. In order to get access to these scholarship dollars, you, the regents, and the system, where's Deputy Commissioner Seck, you're officially under the bus, it's your first meeting. We'd like to see, we want to see one portal, one gate, one entryway, and one uniform tuition structure like we've been talking about with the Lumina funding that we've had for the last several years. Improving teacher quality, standard request for federal authority, community college assistance. We have proposed an additional $35,000 for both Dawson and Miles to help maintain their implementation of the Banner data system. That data system will feed into another DP that we funded over at the Office of Public Instruction, so that we can start to get some more cohesive nature to our data and our data utilization throughout the state. We can be more accountable for the dollars that we do receive. We continue to fund the community colleges at the 50.8% level, which results in an additional $5.4 million in community college funding. It was appropriated it was proposed to flow through the existing formula that is outlined in statute. Educational outreach and diversity, again, this is just sort of standard language, rent increases, additional federal authority, and then continuation of reductions that were made last biennium. Workforce development program, again, additional federal authority. Appropriation distribution, the big kahuna, so to speak. We have proposed maintaining funding for PBS satellite uplink funding. We've also proposed maintain funding for Montana State University's biodiesel research program. The big one down there in the most appropriate colors that I could think of gold and, or of green and copper. We have proposed a new proposal for an additional $12.66 million in university system funding. Those dollars would come to the system. It would be on top of what would be the present law decision packages. These are those dollar amounts. If you see, it's 10.4 and 11.6. Those present laws more than cover the 18 million one-time only tuition mitigation funding, which was appropriated last session. So on top of backfilling that, you then have the new proposal for $12.6 million. Also, it's important to note that it won't show up as a new proposal or a decision package generally, but the 645 quote-unquote switch-out money that was utilized through ARRA has been backfilled as part of present law base, so it will not require an additional vote. Again, all of the globals hold the 177140, 4% personal services. In the Tribal College Assistance Program, we maintain the $3,024 per student non-beneficiary student assistance to tribal colleges. Student loan program, fairly standard. There is an FTE reduction that was proposed and we accepted. And the biggest deal of the day, yes, we did zero-base fund the Board of Regents per diem, so we have proposed to give you all your $50 per meeting. You're welcome, Clay. Long-range building program, this is not House Bill 2, this is House Bill 5. Numbers are sort of small. The net effect of it is we've proposed just over $1 million in life and safety upgrades through the LRBP. We've also given or proposed general spending authority of $6 million for the UM campuses and $6 million for the MSU campuses. The pay plan, we did propose, we are proposing that the pay plan of 1 and 3 that the governor has reached with the faculty be funded at the resident student level, so that would be 80% state share versus the, I believe it's about 50% on average state share. Those numbers represent the total dollar amounts within the pay plan of 1 and 3. And with that, any questions?
Any questions for Dan, for members of the board? Regent Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Villa, can we get a copy of your slides from yesterday and today emailed to us?
They are posted on the Board of Education webpage. So if you go to the governor's webpage, click on Board of Ed, both presentations will be found there.
Mr. Chair, my question is not directed for Mr. Villa, but instead I think for the Commissioner. At our last meeting, we approved the dual enrollment guidelines, and the last portion of it related to the cost approach that we were going to look at, and I was just wondering if you could bring us up to speed on where those efforts are to create a streamlined approach across the system. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent McLean. They're not quite out of the starting gate. So we have plenty of time to work with this because, as you recall, that was during the listening sessions and just when one deputy commissioner was leaving and another one doesn't start till January 1. So we'll work it out, ideas with what we call the two-year council and the campus fiscal and officers and the presidents, but it hasn't gotten started yet, but it will.
Other questions from members of the board? Campus leaders, faculty leaders? Any public comment or questions for Mr. Villa? Dan, thank you very much for your continued stewardship on behalf of the education system in the state. And with that, Mr. Chairman, it is your meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Buchanan. We will now move to Academic Research and Student Affairs Committee. Chairman Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first item is some revisions to the 2+2 honor scholarship, the methodology. I guess I'm not sure who's going to present on that. Is it Mr. Marks or you, Sylvia?
Thank you, Chairman Barrett, Commissioners, Regent Commissioners. I've pluraled you. Our first action item is the 2+2 honor scholarship. When I first came on a couple of years ago, this discussion began. It doesn't take too long. The glaciers may be melting a little faster than we are, but that's all right. What this was, the intent was to broaden this scholarship to be available to students at all of our two-year institutions. In addition, we have taken the advantage of the revision to clean up the practices a little bit, and one other shift is the locus of where the application is submitted, which will come directly to OCHE. Mr. Marks is available for any questions.
Okay, are there any questions? I'll say that we had as is the practice before each board meeting, had a conference call with the committee members on it, plus all the chief academic officers from all the institutions. This was discussed. There were a few questions about it, but on the whole, it's a step we deem we need to take. It may need to be refined, but right now, even though this isn't a large body of the scholarships, it's limited right now just by this policy to the community colleges and doesn't include the two-year. At the same time, of course, we're trying to emphasize the importance of two-year, so it seemed inconsistent. So it was the thought of at that level of the committee to suggest moving this forward. Regent Pease and then Regent Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This, of course, is very much a part of the sort of incentive that we hope to offer to transfer students, and really looking for the scholarship recipient in our community colleges. As I looked at this, I thought that there would be, I am concerned that there's a disproportionately low, perhaps, number of students who are American Indian who would be coming from the community colleges because of the number of tribal colleges in our state, and that in some respects then the students who stay in the tribal colleges doing what they should do would have less access to this particular scholarship than they would if they were obviously in a community college. It concerns me that by its structure we'll have a disproportionately low number of American Indian recipients. So I'd just like to say that one more time. I'm not certain that I have a solution to propose to it, but to say that I think that in its structure currently we'll end up with a disproportionately low number of American Indians.
Regent Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I share Regent Pease's concerns, and I'd like to add another one. We've had lots of conversations about motivating adult learners, and our intention through College Now is to have adult learners move into the system through two-year colleges, and yet the policy as it's proposed and revised suggests that they would have to be full-time students with the number of credits that they're taking. And so I'm concerned about that. We did discuss that in the committee meeting. I don't know that it would prevent me from supporting this change, but I think at some point we have to address how we incentivize adult learners to participate in higher education.
Thank you, Regent Hamilton. I mean, both those things were raised, and I think there were valid points, and that's when I said there was some discussion. And I think the general consensus was that this should be viewed as a work in process. The dollars are relatively small, but symbolically, eliminating all the other 2 years, is a message too. So we probably need to take this step and then see what we can do to address those others. Because if we don't act, then we've eliminated all the 2 years except the community colleges. So it's sort of a catch-22. But again, I think the aggregate number here was about $60,000 or $70,000 we calculated. So those are valid concerns, and I think we need to address those. Regent Pease.
Mr. Chairman, yes, I have a concern that probably the question needs to go to President Hickswa. I know you have a number of online students, and I'm just concerned as to whether there would be ample access under what you see written here to a student who would graduate from a program there at Miles Community College having studied online. Now, I don't know if there would be any difference in the way this is applied, but I'm just hoping, of course, that an online student would have full access to this opportunity.
I read no difference in here, any distinction between, but I have to say I didn't read it with that in mind. So, but I saw no distinction between the type of student. Yeah, I would too.
It is now.
Use your teacher voice.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I have a doctorate, but apparently not in technology. To answer your question, Regent Pease, we don't make any distinction between our online students and our on-campus students, and many of those students are online sometimes and on campus sometimes, just like any other schools. And so it certainly can benefit the online students as well. And also just a comment, some of my initial concern on this policy was that it would limit the number of scholarships, and the current language has addressed these concerns. It's a very important scholarship for our transfer students, and those honor students depend on it.
Are there any President Karras, I guess you have the largest community college. Are there any thoughts or implications that you see, and are you better at the technology than President Hickswa?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, you are.
Yep.
We do have quite a few transfer students. In fact, we were just looking at the numbers for the University of Montana, Missoula the other day, and we're second after MSU Bozeman by one student in transferring students to the University of Montana, Missoula. So we do have quite a few students who are eligible for the scholarship, and as you know, many of our students do need the assistance to be able to continue their education. But we certainly believe that all of the two-year college students, the tribal colleges, the colleges of technology, all of those students should have the same opportunities. The question is, I think with the structure that you have here, certainly with the number of scholarships being based on the number of students graduating with associate degrees, will there be enough funds to be able to support all of those students who are eligible?
Thank you. Any other questions? Is it the sense of the committee to move this forward for approval? Oh, excuse me. Mr. Villa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This policy seems, at least in our view, a little premature. We've had several concerns raised. Primarily among our concerns are exactly those what Regent Hamilton discussed, and that is the adult learner piece. In addition to that, we share Regent Pease's concern about the disproportionate amount of Native American students who will essentially not receive these scholarships. We have a continuing argument and discussion back and forth about too much need-based, too much merit-based, not enough need-based, not enough merit-based. We have the continuing conversation about 2-year, 4-year transferability, dual enrollment. The elephant in the room, in our view, is we're changing policies before we change the structures that implement the policies. I mean, here we are, 6 months, 8 months, almost a year after the direct lending switch, but we haven't made the structural changes necessary to accommodate that in their entirety. So we're changing policy before we change the structures. And I guess the question I would ask is whether or not we wanted to get the implementing entities where they need to be before we start changing the policies. Because it's one thing to have, I'd want to know what driver's driving what car before we start buying cars. And that's the issue with this policy.
Dr. Moore?
Chairman Barrett, Regents, one of the things that I would comment on is realize that the scholarship exists now. It goes to just the community colleges now. This change was to make the scholarship so that it went to more campuses, or was made available to more campuses. I don't quibble with any of the things that have been said in terms of needing more scholarships, and scholarships that are targeted to minorities and scholarships that are targeted to our adult students. But we don't have any bigger piece of pie than this one right now. And so I would love us to hang on to that thread of conversation as we build more scholarships. But this was really about what I think President Karras and President Hickswath said so eloquently, is that we're not trying to glom onto this just for the 3 community colleges. We would like to have it for all of our 2-year colleges. And so that was really the intent of this change, and some minor cleanup that went with it. But we don't have a new pool of money to go after that, and yet I hear from your report, Mr. Villa, that we may have, and then we could start to visit some of those. But this one, I think we don't want to make it too complicated in what it was trying to accomplish.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Regent Hamilton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure that I'm correct in the way I'm thinking about this in response to Mr. Villa's comments. These waivers are a cost incurred by the receiving campus. Is that correct? I'm not sure who I'm asking, maybe Deputy Commissioner Robinson or Deputy Commissioner Moore. And if so, if we assume that that most of our 2-year students are going to transfer to one of the larger 4-year campuses, they would probably be best prepared to absorb that cost. But maybe I'm not thinking about this correctly.
Well, Regent Hamilton, I think you are correct in terms of a waiver that is granted at a particular campus is a cost or a loss of revenue for that particular campus. So the tuition for that particular student is waived. So the campus is absorbing that student into the mix of students without any additional revenue flowing to cover the costs related to that student.
Regent Hamilton.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could follow up, Deputy Commissioner Robinson, the issue of the direct lending, how does that impact this policy and or our waivers in the system?
Regent Hamilton, I don't see any connection with the direct lending issue. When we talk about whether it's direct lending or the FELP lending program, it was simply dealing with student loans and the mechanism in which the student loan is acquired, and now the mechanism is the direct program through the federal government. And so, student loan, there may be a student loan required for a particular student, but that in no way has a direct relationship with a waiver that would be offered for that student.
Any additional questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, just a couple of things. Yes. We actually do fund quite a few waivers within the university system. We're up to like 8.9 million this year in waivers that we actually applied we did the full present law on the waivers that were requested. It took us a little time to figure out how it was requested, but we got there. But ultimately, it boils down to the fact that we have a program within the Commissioner's office that is responsible for all of these. We're not quite sure who's on first where that's coming from. So that is one of the concerns. As far as the expanding it to all campuses or expanding it from beyond just the community colleges, I mean, there are substantive changes in here beyond that. For an example, we go from beyond a Montana resident being eligible to the waiver to a U.S. citizen being eligible for the waiver. So there are substantive changes in here beyond just the campus piece. And until we figure out who's driving the car, we'd prefer to wait on on making the purchase of the car.
Mr. Stearns?
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question? And I'm not sure to direct it to either Mr. Robinson or perhaps the campuses, but or maybe to you, Dr. Moore. Isn't this a similar version of the MUS Honor Scholarship? It's just targeted primarily currently to the 3 community colleges, and this proposes to expand it. And in that way, how it is similar is that it is merit-based, tiebreaker to need, but merit-based, and it is absorbed, the expense, as we talked about, is absorbed by the receiving campus. So what this policy does is to just further sort of bless the campuses to give more waivers to excellent students at the 2-year colleges. Is that what it comes down to, or am I missing something?
Well, the only thing I would ask, I don't think there are any more waivers. There's the same number of
same number of
dollars.
waivers.
It's just different places. The dollar amount did not change.
Right.
That the amount of money spent won't change.
And if I could, Mr. Chair, one of the reasons you try to clean up policies like this, even if in a year or two, I mean, I would love, as you heard me say at breakfast this morning, to have a much better master plan in terms of increasing and being more thoughtful and holistic about really increasing need-based aid in the state. There's just almost no driver that would enable us to reach retention and graduation goals than to do that. But in the meantime, I remember you saying quite eloquently once, Regent Buchanan, if we have a policy, even in the fairly short term, let's try to abide by it. So even if it has to be changed in a year or two, I think the reason we're trying to clean this up was so that we could recognize the good 2-year students in the other campuses until perhaps there's a more holistic revision of all the scholarship policies, which we, would be, for the reasons I just said, quite interested in. In the meantime, it just seems to me a cleanup of a policy, or we could not pass it and then just sort of disenfranchise the access for the other 2-year colleges to this and just wait until there's a more massive cleanup. It's not putting in new money, is it? No. Okay. I'm not quite getting the problem.
Any additional comments or questions? I didn't really ask in a sequence, but any public comment on this item? Any comment from on the campuses? Should have done that first, but I didn't. But I'll do so in the future. Okay. Same question. I guess we'll just visit this when we visit it with at the actual committee meeting tomorrow. The next, we have a list of, not particularly long list of consent items. I'll report to the audience that when we had our academic committee conference call, it was the sense of the committee. We discussed these, frankly, all of them at some length, and it was the sense that these are fundamentally name-changing, housekeeping, rearranging type of things, which I was interested in because, I stated at the last meeting, I'm going to start looking very hard at level 2 items that would create new obligations. These fundamentally were just cleanup changes. And it was the consensus on the phone call of all the chief academic officers to move them forward. So first I'll ask if there's any public comment on these consent items or anybody that wishes to withdraw one from members of the public. I'll start by saying I was approached by a student over the lunch hour who had waited but could not stay and had a comment and asked if I would read it, and I said I would, so it would be part of the public comment and part of the record. Said, my name is Nathan Bohl, a student representative from Western, writing in support of the proposed curriculum changes addressed in today's agenda. We, the students, strongly believe that these proposals will greatly benefit the respective departments in a number of ways, including student enrollment and retention, the efficient and progressive application of our unique Experience One ideology, and the overall value of the Western degree upon entering the professional or postgraduate academic world. I strongly urge you to approve these proposals, and I thank you for your time and service. Nathan Bohl. So any additional public comment or desire to remove any of these items from the consent agenda? Anything from among the campuses? Okay, then among the regents? Okay, then we would be bringing these forward for consent approval tomorrow. We have information items now. The level 1 memorandums that were approved at OCHI, they have authority to approve those level 1 items, so they have done so. They're simply advising us. They're in detail on the attachment.
Regent Barrett, if I may, I'd just like to pull out one, and that is the Flathead Valley Community College 18 to 19 credit fully online health information technology. Just to remind you that 2 of these were approved at the last meeting or reported at the last meeting. This is that consortium approach being spearheaded out of Montana Tech. And so we're pleased to have another campus join in on that effort. And thank you, President Karras.
Regent Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to pull anything out. I would just like to make a comment. I'm the Dawson Community College Ag Power and Machinery to Gas and Diesel Mechanics change. I'm hoping, Deputy Commissioner Moore, that as these come through your office, you're continuing to encourage these campuses to develop articulation agreements with campuses that have the baccalaureate programs in those areas. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you. That is correct. And they had been in discussion with Northern. So there is, even with the level 1s, there's an expectation that they visit with one another.
Thank you. Any additional questions or explanations? All right. Program reviews. I'm not really sure what we want to do with these. The program reviews are somewhat detailed. I have a couple comments on them, but I guess I'll ask, again, they've been posted. Each one of them is relatively lengthy, so we're not going to go through each one, but I'll first ask, on these program reviews, is there any public comment? And then is there any, seeing none, any comment from among the campuses? Okay, my comment would be, I went through all of them. I know Lynn and I need to get lives. And I think it's very useful information, and the question that comes to my mind, and we're not going to act on it today, but the question that comes to my mind when you read these is what happens next? Because I've read all the program reviews, and I will make up the number, but I'm going to say on one hand, the number of programs or classes that were suggested to be dropped, we would count on, 2 or 3 fingers. And the number of programs that because they show a 10-year history, the number of programs that over 10 years had less than 5 people involved in them, it would take our hands and feet to count. And there's just something wrong that the programs keep continuing and they're empty, and I don't see how we get the connection to prioritize take that information, if we want to find a way to get more money to a department, if they have a bunch of FT classes and they don't do those, they've got more money. And don't know how we're going to close that loop, and this is not necessarily the mechanism to close it, but this is the mechanism that's telling us that we need to do something.
Regent
Dr.
Barrett,
Moore.
thank you for bringing that up. We had this discussion yesterday in the Chief Academic Officers meeting. One of the questions that I posed to them is the low number question. And one of the things that most of the campuses have done with their program reviews is disaggregated the minors and the options and put the numbers forward in that way as opposed to rolling them up into the degree itself. So the numbers are not as bad if you reaggregate the programs. The other thing is there is a significant amount of data that is not in these documents in terms of faculty productivity, workloads, and the like that also goes in that program review. One of the things that we have not done, and it would be whether the regents would want to invite the campuses to do that, is that we have not structured our program review process to look at all the programs on one campus at one time. And that would be a strategic resource alignment look that would go with their strategic planning. And I think the message that I've heard from both the committee members and the board in general is that that will be a campus by campus activity as they look to say, do they have to find resources from within? But I do think we're seeing nationwide a look at should there be a threshold on numbers. And I think to this board's credit, they have said that should be an individual campus decision because these campuses are not the same size because there may be some things that are mission critical. But they are at least looking at that data and using it internally along with some other data. But I think your question is the same one we're wrestling with.
Well, again, I'm glad that discussion is starting, but I want to know what the next action step is to close this loop, because there is a disconnect. And even if they aggregate those numbers, and I can appreciate that, you can look at even if they aggregate them, there'll be some significantly low numbers. Now, there may be a reason. Again, some of them are service programs that you need just because you have to have things because of other relative majors. I mean, I understand that it's not some simplistic thing, but it just looks to me like some quantity. I don't want to say a percent because whatever it is, it's just a guess, but some percentage that probably has more than, or has at least 2 digits in it, could be eliminated and we not suffer, and that money stays there. I mean, that's the best source of finding new funds to pay professors more or do other things is the money that's already here, because the world is telling us there's not new money coming in. And the one other thing, it's a minor thing, but I noticed that everybody gets the same set of questions when they do these reviews. It would certainly be interesting, nice, just convenient for a reviewer if they would all use the same format in answering. That is, the question's the same, but then we get tables going this way and tables going this way, and some collect the years and some don't. Missoula's, I thought, the most readable. I don't really care, but if they all read the same, it would be way easier to analyze this data, and possibly that committee could discuss that. I mean, a report should be a report, and not having to invent finding the data each time.
Well, if you'll remember, Chairman Barrett, you terrorized the group last year, and the one person who did very well was
Yes.
Doug Abbott from Tech, and he kind of took it hard by doing so well. So I think they were all avoiding being the best. Just kidding.
Regent Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I share your concerns about the graduation completion rates. And I appreciate the campus's position that from a cost standpoint, if these are kind of programs that take courses from other areas that are already being taught and bundle them into a degree program, that isn't necessarily a more costly way of delivering a degree. I mean, it might actually be a cost savings way because you serve a student who wants that program. But I am concerned about analyzing some of the numbers when you look across head count and graduation in these different majors, and particularly at the graduate level. And I guess what we just did earlier, the conversation we had, may improve that completion rate at the graduate level. At least that's my hope. But I'm wondering if the head count to graduation at the undergraduate degree doesn't perhaps maybe indicate some of the problems we have in retention to graduation. And not necessarily as part of the conversation today, but long term, I think it would be good for us to have a way to talk about the things we've been talking about for the last couple of meetings. Course completion, program graduation, quality programs, what does that mean? Faculty productivity, what does that mean in terms of quality program offerings? And does a student who graduates after 5 or 6 years with 2 or 3 other people have the same kind of quality education experience in their program as somebody who graduates with 50?
Well, that's my thought exactly. And I didn't count them, but I'm going to suggest there is more than 5. I don't remember how many, maybe more than 5 and less than 10 programs, master's programs with one person. Now, I don't know all the implications of that, but if there is a graduate student and that person has an advisor and some member of the faculty is having non-teaching time to deal with that one graduate student, and I question, absent other input that could clarify it, why would we would be maintaining programs like that? And there were a number of them that had one over a several-year span. And I just don't, in graduate level, I particularly don't get it. At the master's level. Anyway, thank you. Any additional comments or questions on the program reviews? Regent Pease? Did I talk you into that question, or were you really going to ask one?
Well, it seems to me that the manner in which we discuss the programs, we're answering questions that we've been asked to answer. But it seems to me that now in this particular, in the context of our review of the budget and budget reductions over the last, in our preparation for this coming biennium, that there probably are other questions we need to ask. And we need to be forthright about it. What is the value of the master's degree where there's only one per year, and what is the reason for that lowest enrollment? When I look at the discussion, I don't see that. Perhaps there's a series of questions we're needing to ask, because obviously everyone's doing their best to answer what is required of them. Obviously, too, there are programs for whom, like in the modern languages, you're probably spending a good deal of time completing general ed requirements or the modern language requirements in certain fields of study. And yet, we're looking for, in this particular set of questions, how many graduated in this field. So there are purposes that this process somehow doesn't quite bring out. And we need to ask the right questions, obviously. But I am concerned that we are, so if the program review process is completed, what is, then what? What is the consequence? Where does it take us? And I think that probably even hearing from some of the campuses, you look at this data, then where does it go from there? Obviously, well, it's done. It's a check off. There's a certain number of things that have been reviewed and analyzed. Maybe that's, President Engstrom, maybe that's something that you could tell us what happens in the next step.
Regent Pease, members of the board, I think that, one question that comes out of the program review is sort of the yes or no continue question. I mean, it's either We either keep it or we don't keep it. That's one question, and you're correct in the observation that the answer is usually yes, we keep it. But there is quite a bit more to these program reviews that takes place than just that yes or no question, and it's all about program improvement. And so each of these program reviews, has involved a pretty extensive study of the program, and out of that study may be curricular changes, it may be even staffing changes in some cases, and some of the things that come before you as options and other kinds of program modifications are the result of these program reviews. I'm not thinking off the top of my head of any specific examples, but maybe some of my colleagues could think of an example or two of a program improvement that maybe came out of these program reviews. So it's more than just a yes or no question, the value of what we do here. I thought I saw a colleague out there that might volunteer.
Yeah, Arlene Walker-Andrews, Associate Provost, who at this point oversees all the program reviews, and maybe I can just say a little bit about our process and then the kind of other information we have. So for example, you just mentioned modern and classical languages, and like all of the others, we ask the departments to do a self-study, some of which are an inch high, some of which are this high. I really do have them that big in my office. Then we bring in an external reviewer from a peer or a campus that we hope to be like. I try to always select people that are maybe a little better than we are, if at all possible. They visit the department, the students, the faculty, us, etc. Then they issue a written report, and I always give you the summary paragraph from that. And then our graduate council, if they have a graduate program, looks at those. And then we meet with those faculty to discuss various things. Now, in this particular one, Modern and Classical Languages and Literatures, in this particular case, I did say retain the BA and MA degrees. We terminated a minor in Business French, and in fact, we had done that before I wrote this report. It was part of that whole process. And then there have, of course, been course changes as well. The reason I picked this one is just because, as you said, Regent Barrett, there's also, of course, many small pieces to that. So there's not a lot of students majoring in Japanese, but there's lots of students taking Japanese. And so I remember I pointed out in here that there were about 8,000 student credit hours generated by this program in the fall because of the students that must take a language, and I would personally believe better be taking another language. In addition, if you were to look at our institutional Office of Institutional Research page, we have up there what we call our unit data, which actually reports for every department for several years, the number of students, the number of credit hours, the number of FTE, the amount we spend per student, the number of courses, the average class size, all of those things. It comes out to at least 4 or 5 single-space pages per department. And so when the provost meets with all of these departments, particularly at the 7-year stage, but really every year, all of these questions get asked. And I assure you they do, because every year in all of the academic officers' meetings, every dean is pointing out to us how those aren't really entirely true, that they're really doing many more things that we're not giving them credit for, which is, of course, what they're part of their business, to try to put their programs in the best light. But so all of these things are considered, but when we report to you every 7 years, it's just how many students are currently enrolled and how many graduated. And I don't think that gives the full picture of what we do. I was probably supposed to give a specific example, and I did give the Business French, but I know that in the ASCRC, which is our undergraduate committee for looking at curriculum, we go through at least 171 course changes minimally every year and advise stopping programs, starting programs, revising programs. So I think a lot of attention is given to that. We just don't report very much to you in these reports. And I'm not against doing so. I mean, we have plenty of data that would be available.
Well, if I can ask the question, I think there's plenty of analysis done. but it doesn't seem like there's anything done about analysis. And I'll say this, I'm looking at, you got the block since you're here, so I'm looking at the fine arts section, and I see you're offering a Master of Arts in French, German, and Spanish.
Right.
And you show the numbers each year, and for the past 5 years, that has averaged 1 in each of those majors. And I would just say, why would we offer a master's program that averages 1 person a year? Is there, not that there's no value in the education, but is there whatever dollars are put in that, would they be better spent someplace else within the university and the department than maintaining a graduate program that averages 1 person a year?
Right.
That seems, with the data I have, that's the question I have. There may be answers, but it strikes me as just an anomaly to maintain a graduate program to average 1 person a year, because there are costs associated with that, and that money could just raise the salaries of the people in the department, if nothing else.
I'm going to let the president answer that one.
That's why you got the job.
Well, I think it's a legitimate question, Regent Barrett, and one that we probably need to grapple with more than we have. And so over the next couple of years, we'll try to do that through a systematic process.
And I want to say that this happened to be the example. There are numbers of others at numbers of campuses, so you're not really getting picked on, but just...
Right. Well, can I also want to say one other thing, and this is just, I hate to be one of those persons that says when I was at, but when I was at Rutgers University, which is about 35,000 students, and the reason I'm bringing this up has to do with the options and the rolling up. I was in a department of 51 faculty with 1,600 majors and 1,000 minors, and that was psychology. But we did not break any of that into options at all. And so one of the other things I did for myself this last week was to simply compare a lot of the options. And in truth, it's a lot of it, as you said before, repackaging, moving from other places, and we do that for students, but I don't think in most cases that's costing more. I honestly can't answer you about the French and the German and the single masters, but I think I could truly say that there's no one getting huge course release for having 1 graduate student. I mean, I think for most faculty that's seen as sort of a perk. Isn't it wonderful that I have this graduate student and I contribute my time and efforts with that student?
Thank you. Additional questions? Regent Buchanan?
Thanks, Chairman Barrett. I think your line of questioning is spot on to a concern that this board has elevated as something that we want to discuss and push. And I hear recognition of opportunity to do that in those responses and voice a lot of support for your approach to digesting it, because at the end of the day, the people that I think we work for, the citizens of the state, they look at it the same way too. And with the finite resource situation that we find ourselves in, this is an activity that we as a board just unanimously endorsed with our success agenda, saying let's add some budgetary elements to the program review process. And I'm thankful to President Engstrom for saying we're going to address it, but I think Regent Barrett has my complete support. I'm on the same page with the line of questioning. He's right on to an issue that I think we've got resolution in front of us on, and look forward to hearing progress with it. Thank you, Steve.
I thank you. Any additional questions? Joe?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'll piggyback on Regent Buchanan's comments and try to give my colleague over there, President Engstrom, an example. If you notice, one of our reviews was our business degree programs, and you can look very clearly that we've had considerable enrollment at our small campus and have failed quite miserably in actually getting students out that door. Over the past few years, we've been, really over the last year, implementing a new program review process on our campus that really gets into the criteria necessary to evaluate what's going on. And you'll see we have a series of actions that we are implementing. One of the things we found simply is that we've merged two options. Students didn't want an entrepreneurship option and a management option, and so we lost students because we were forcing them to take an option. We also identified that many of our students in that program were adult students who wanted a more flexible option. We moved those programs online. Part of that process has allowed us to identify sort of strategies to get at the desired outcome. In this case, one of those outcomes is increasing the graduates. Our program review process now actually has three options when it comes out of that review. One, continue as is, it's doing good. Two, continue with an improvement plan. Here are the specific things we need to do or believe we need to do to improve it. Or three, discontinue it. And we believe that we'll see more of the options in the middle as we go forward, but probably some where we will discontinue programs. The point I think I want to make as a follow-up to Regent Buchanan's comment is just to remind you of your success agenda. At our campus, we've identified very specific performance measures, very specific desired outcomes, and those criteria are more than just graduation rates, their job placement rates, their employer satisfaction, their earnings, they're all of those things that sort of tell us whether or not what we're doing is effective. Not all graduates may be the same value. To be honest with you, we may graduate 10 students when it comes to placement rate, don't have the value of where we graduate 5. We need to look at that comprehensive picture. From a systems perspective, the things on your success agenda will help us do that by understanding the role of our institution. We believe we're a community college and we have a set of measures that adapt that philosophy, but also looking at systems program alignment. From a systems perspective, are all graduates, are all degrees worth the same to the state? And I think those are important things for us as campuses to understand so that we can adopt our internal processes for program review to know that we're matching and measuring our success versus the outcomes that you truly want and desire as a board. Thank you.
Thank you. And I did notice in your review those comments, and again, to my mind, the demographic that you're dealing with, your 2 years, a totally different demographic or a substantively different demographic, and I think it has to be looked at in a different way, just as you described. Additional comments or questions? Okay, if not, then we'll move on to the next information item, which is an RFP for our scholarship management software. Say that 3 times real quickly.
Thank you.
Dr. Moore, are you handling that?
Well, I will handle that, although I know my expertise sits elsewhere in the room. But I'm playing this game of thinking I know what I'm doing. We are looking actually at trying to solve the dilemma of an increasing number of students and increasing complexity and how we manage not only our scholarships but also our programs such as WICHE, WWAMI, Minnesota Dental, our Mr. Pip program, and some of those things in a much more user-friendly fashion, and the user being not only the student, but also the people who do the input. So our schools who give us grade points and that sort of thing, our parents who frequently are helping pay the bill or at least signing on a line for the responsibility of their student taking on a debt. And we would like to have a system that is much easier and more adaptive for all of the consumers. The software packages allow that. They're not an inexpensive investment. However, we feel that the gain in a number of sectors for the students, for our office, for the campuses, for the parents would be an immense gain. And we're looking to use some of the operating funds out of the Montana Guaranteed Student Loan Program to fund the purchase of that software, and then we would implement it on all of our programs of that nature.
Yeah, I mean, I think as I understood, this is system-wide.
Correct.
Okay. Any public comment on that agenda item? A comment from on the campuses? Any questions among the regents? Regent Hamilton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deputy Commissioner Moore, is this software like Banner compatible so that in the future we're not going to have issues?
I'm going to ask Mr. Marks he's shaking his head. Yes, it is Banner compatible, but that's a very good question. Thank you. We have everything anymore is Banner has become a verb. So.
Any additional questions? Regent McLean?
I guess I just want to speak to it from the perspective of a high school counselor, which I am not, but work closely with them. And and I think that this would be a fabulous tool to be a repository for all of the student data. As you indicate here, there is so much duplication of time and of efforts and of processes. And so from a counselor's perspective, this would save a lot of time and scarce resources.
Thank you. Any additional questions? If not, thank you. We move on. And then the last information item is the Native American Heritage Month report. Who's Dr.
Chairman Barrett, with your permission, I would like to delay this until after the break. We have a student coming who couldn't get out of class until 3 o'clock that would be part of this presentation. And I checked with the following committee, and they would be willing to flex if you are.
Well, I certainly am. It's the chair we'll have to worry about. Okay, at that, then we'll ask if there's any public comment on any items not on the agenda. If not, Mr. Chairman? Oh, excuse me, someone is coming. Sorry, I did not see him.
Members of the board, I'm John Newmeyer from the Department of Physics at MSU. And I just wanted to come back to this issue of program reviews and mention a few items with regard to that. First, I'd like to share a quote with you, and it is, "Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted." And that's from Albert Einstein, of all people. And I think with regard to these program reviews, it's interesting when you look at the numbers, especially for the physics department. You've got about 20 undergraduates that graduate each year, and about 4 to 5 PhD students. Sounds very small, but I need to assure you that this is a vibrant department. The department brings in $5 to $8 million a year in external funding. Myself, in 8 years, I've brought in $2 million. Okay, it's quite amazing. And then in addition, if you look at the classes that we teach a huge number of service classes. So myself, I've taught about 1,800 students in 8 years. Okay, so I think the numbers are a little bit deceiving as to what we're really doing there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I think your comments are well said. The numbers don't tell everything, but the numbers make us inquire. Clearly, you don't have to be a physicist to figure out that you're going to have a low number of grad students in physics, because not everybody can do it, including me. So, but we thank you for those comments. And that's why we need more than just the numbers, but I'm afraid it always seems to stop at the numbers. With that, Mr. Chairman, it's back to you in the booth.
Thank you, Regent Barrett. I think what we'll do, rather than diving into staff and comp right at this moment, is take a 10-minute break. If our student is here and ready to go, we'll do that. Otherwise, we'll go to staff and comp and then come back to the last item in the academic one. Let's break 10 minutes or so, and 15 we'll rejoin. Back to the Academic Research and Student Affairs Committee for our last item, and then we'll move into staff and comp.
All right, thank you. Mr. Chairman, we're going to have a report on the Native American Heritage Month report, and I don't remember. There you go. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm happy to be here and to address you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the board, as well as Commissioner Stearns, and kind of give an update regarding the successes and some of the issues that we still face with the Native American education and higher ed today. Some of the things that I know that we're looking at is that we do have an input group that we are working closely with the Access to Success group in identifying what areas that we're working really well in and what areas we still need improvement in. And we have representatives from the K-12 all the way through higher ed. The tribal colleges are also represented on that. And some of the conversations that we've had have been really, really good in terms of looking at, if we want to relate it to the success agenda, the success of our Native students. I know in the last, this year alone, at the University of Montana, there's over 500 Native Americans within the University of Montana system this semester, which is a record number, as well as at the Montana State University system as well, the number is about 500. The question that I have is that, in 6 years from now, are we going to be graduating anywhere near close to that number on either campus? And so if we start looking at, the record enrollments all throughout the university system and looking at our Native American students, what is successful? When we look at our success agenda, how are we going to ensure that those pathways are there so that our minority students are able to be successful? If we look at the economic future of our state, we have to include everybody when we look towards our workforce needs. Some of our poorest communities are on the reservation areas. And if we don't concentrate and don't look at the academic success of students in those areas, we're not going to economically advance the way that we should as a state. Go ahead, Summer. Some of the, actually the history regarding Native American Heritage Month, in 1916, a Blackfeet tribal member went through 24 states and secured the endorsements of the governments to have one day to honor American Indians. And for us, we also celebrate that in September, and we did have a brief thing in September in recognition of Native American Heritage Day. But in 1990, next slide, yeah. President George H.W. Bush signed a congressional resolution designating November as National American Indian Heritage Month. And similar proclamations have been issued every year since 1994. And President Obama just recently signed his as well. So if we look beyond and we look in the past, education's come a long way since the boarding school era. And even in the last, if we look in higher ed, education's come a long ways. There was that one point in one time that we didn't have hardly any Native American students in higher ed. And that number is increasing, but we need to make sure that not only access is there, but also student retention and graduation rates. So as we continue on, again, like I said, looking towards the future, it is in your hands as a board to ensure and to help us to ensure the success of minority students and at-risk students. Some of the pictures that are going up are from some of the different campuses and also from Gear Up and Talent Search, which actually are really good pathways for our students into higher ed. Okay. Are there any questions?
If I could, Casey, where was that wonderful picture of those from maybe several decades ago? Lots and lots of Indian children sitting in front of.
Oh, that was Carlisle, Pennsylvania.
That was in Carlisle? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
That was from the boarding school there. Okay.
Interesting, thank you.
Okay. I would like to introduce, or actually have Sandy from Gear Up come up. And she is going to introduce a student from the University of Montana to kind of highlight some of the successes of our students.
Good afternoon. I'm Sandy Merdinger, the Director of Montana Gear Up. And I'm not going to tell you a whole lot about Gear Up today. I think that our student is a much better representative. I do want to say that we're in the final year of our second 6-year grant, and we'll be looking to write again soon. This year we're serving over 4,000 students in 24 middle schools, and they're receiving high schools. And with that, I want to introduce Chelsea Morales, who is a 2006 graduate of Harlem High School. She was in Gear Up from grade 7 through high school at Harlem. And 4 years ago, she was here as a freshman and spoke to you, those of you that were on the board then, and talked a little bit about her transition from Harlem and high school there into the campus here. So 4 years later, this is her final semester. She will graduate this December, and in human biology. Has done a great job here, and she's going to tell you a little bit about her background with GEAR Up and how she found her way through college here at the university.
Hello, my name is Chelsea Morales. Like she said, I'm from Harlem, Montana, which is nearby the Fort Belknap reservation, so I'm enrolled as a Gros Ventre. Yeah, I'll be graduating this semester, which I'm very excited for. And then I have plans to go to grad school here at the pharmacy program under pharmaceutical sciences, so pursuing my master's in that. And so my transition from high school to college was pretty huge. I think the main thing would be independence, having to do a lot of things on my own and not kind of having my parents sort of being there and supporting me in a lot of ways that I was used to. Which was nice though with my transition is that there was a few students from my home that came with me, so it was nice for a few of us to kind of share in this transition together and get used to the campus and kind of socialize with other people, get to know where our classes are and get to know where things are and our resources. And a lot of what prepared me, I'd really have to say, was GEAR Up. I think a lot of the educational awareness, sort of the campus visits, which for me was huge because I always thought I was going to go to MSU Bozeman. And visiting MSU's campus and then coming to this campus, I was like, whoa, that's really wrong. I'm glad I actually got to visit this campus. And that's how I knew that sort of Missoula was where I wanted to be and start applying for that. And that's also another thing that GEAR Up helped me with is kind of the application process, sort of kind of knowing what was required of you, sort of like the ACTs, the SATs, and that sort of aspect, and also financial aid, sort of how to fill out FAFSA. The huge thing is scholarship. I think introducing me to scholarships really early, knowing that I can get free money, that it was accessible to me, that was like the big thing. I think in junior high was when I got my first scholarship for a really simple essay, which I don't think I really expected or knew how big it was to get that scholarship. And then from then, and then, wow, the huge scholarship. I was a recipient of the Pathway Scholarship. So that, I think, helped me a lot. And I think that made transition in college really easy. I found out that a lot of my friends were having to go to school and then have jobs to pay for their college, whereas me, I just went to school and my job was just studying and not having to worry about it. And it also helped, I think that was like probably the biggest thing that helped me. And then from there, I think knowing that scholarships were accessible, I applied for other scholarships and got a few of those. So, and that also I could kind of share with my friends. So that was like a major transition which helped me and prepared me. And I think in high school what also prepared me was taking AP courses. I think that's a really huge thing, is knowing that whatever your school offers you and having counselors and people of the school really being involved and saying, taking these AP courses are going to be beneficial to you. Because sometimes college is way harder than high school, obviously. And I think taking these AP courses, I realized like it made a huge difference in introducing to me these huge topics, which when I went to college, I kind of knew the idea, and that helped a lot. And I guess I also want to say that my family, like me knowing that I wanted to go to college, had to do a lot with basically knowing that I wanted to do something in the health field. When I was really young, like doctor, and I got older kind of in the health field, and knowing that if I really wanted to do something like that an educational background was important, and GEAR Up kind of showing you like, you need to go to college, education to sort of set this fundamental foundation for college to give you options in the future. Because this day and age, even bachelor's, I think, is kind of really not enough to get you somewhere, and a master's kind of closer, and PhD. So kind of knowing that these are the steps you need to take to eventually be successful in what you want to be successful in. And the motivating factor to even me wanting to go to college and wanting to succeed and sticking it out, even knowing that it's rough and really hard, and being away from home, is, I am Native American, I come from an Indian community, and healthcare and what it means to kind of my people is sort of huge, and I want to be in the health field and helping and kind of providing that sort of care and coming back to my community and helping out where I can, and that's kind of me giving back to my community in that aspect, something I'm passionate about for my people, and me being able to represent them in that way is something really special and important to me. And I know, like, I see myself succeeding now, and I do, like she was saying, that I am seeing more Native American students here, and we are able to interact with each other and sort of help each other out, so we have that support group, and I think that's really important too. So we seeing each other succeed and knowing that we are succeeding, I think that's a huge major, I think like that's really a big thing for me and a motivating factor. So in conclusion, thank you, Gear Up, and I'd like to thank also the Board of Regents for supporting Gear Up and kind of because it's really important. I think it's really important. So thank you. Say.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask, is it Chelsea? Could I ask you a question? This is Commissioner Stearns. It's an easy one, I think, but this semester, for a couple months now, you and your fellow students have been using the new Native American Student Center.
Yes.
Would you tell us just a little bit about how that works, and if it's how is it a nice addition for you and groups? Tell us just a little bit, if you would, please.
Yeah, so definitely, I remember when I first got here, we had that really small Native American building, and I never really knew where it was, and it was really kind of small, and they didn't really have, I think a lot of people didn't really know about it. So I think the new NAC building is way bigger, and they've started integrating a lot of things. I know every week or maybe every couple of weeks they have like a soup Friday, and so that kind of allows like all of us students, because we're not all rich, so it's like a free lunch, and allow us to all socialize, not just with other students, but with like staff and faculty and people who are doing stuff for able American, Indian business leaders and ACEs and stuff like that. So it's almost like a weekly social network, but you're also seeing like other Native American students who, are doing well, and they're there and they're taking advantage of that. And I think they also have like a computer center, which they had in the old building. And I think free printing is really nice, not having to pay 10 cents a paper because you have to print out a lot of slides for different things. That's nice. And then they hold a lot of, I get so many emails about so much stuff that goes on there. People coming, I know recently people came from, like the natives from Hawaii, and came and talked about like kind of how they're like doing immersion and linguistics and cultural things. There's so many cultural events that I think NAC building, having that big of a thing, they're allowed to have their own events there and not having to reserve other places and competing with other buildings and other, like the UC Ballroom or something like that. I know that a lot of different programs are competing for kind of that open space for different events, and having the NAC building, I think there's so much stuff going on all the time, and it's right there. Everyone knows where it's at. It's not a different location every time. It's like, this is going on. It's at the NAC building. And they have things posted up there, what's going on there. So I think that's a huge utilizing factor. And classes are now in there too. That's really neat. I didn't have a class this year, but it'd be nice, yeah. Any other questions?
I have a question. One more question. As you think back on your 4 years here, just looking at the student body that are Native American, how could you characterize that? Are they mostly freshmen, or, what do you see going on in that group as you've met Native American students? Kind of the demographics of it.
Like when I first came?
Yeah, from the time you first came, just kind of thinking about the Native American student experience here. Who are those students? Do they stay?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a really good question, because when I first came here, one of my friends told me to be an ABLE, and so I went to there, and there were a lot of us freshmen Native Americans that were going there, And I find that if, like now, they're not all here, but they're all pursuing education elsewhere. Some are going to nursing, so they'll go to SKC, you know, or to Bozeman where like they have nursing programs, or some are like, they're kind of, if they're not here, I find that some of them are still here, and if they're not, they're still pursuing education just kind of in different places, or they've moved on for programs where they see their interests are. So I guess the demographic from the beginning is sort of like half and half. Half are still here and half have graduated, and half are going to be graduating with me or next year, or some have moved on to other colleges and still pursuing education. So that's what I'd say. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Barrett. So that concludes the committee meeting, and we'll now move into the Staff and Compensation Committee meeting. We have one action item, which is to change some language in our newly adopted success agenda. Regent Buchanan, do you want to address that?
I'd be glad to, and it gives me an opportunity to express some gratitude, I know felt by the board towards some faculty members that had a great hand in the development of the outcomes of the reform work group, but most importantly, a tremendous amount of quality input in the dialogue. And I know Doug Coffin was bouncing around earlier, and Marvin Landsverk and Neil, and even Professor Hinman with the bad wing came up in public comment earlier. You know, clearly with our budget reflects our commitment to, or at least our recognition of how important faculty is. And we certainly have discussions that Kevin does a fantastic job of related to salaries and the specifics to those, but there's no question that we know we don't exist without a high quality faculty and a commitment to involving that stakeholder in the process. And the development of the supplemental document that's on our strategic plan now, the guiding principles, the number one intent there is to welcome, invite, and push involvement from those stakeholders along with students and other staff members. And I shouldn't be limiting my comments to faculty, it's staff and faculty. And this item, I don't know how we prepared the success agenda for the last meeting approval without having this on there. And thanks to Marco for having us elevate this, and I'm very comfortable and excited to add this as an item to the success agenda. So with that, I so move that we adopt that 10th item to be added to our success agenda, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Regent Buchanan. Is there questions about this item? Committee members, we see us moving this forward for tomorrow. Is there any public comment on it?
Mr. Chairman, members of the Regents, my name is Marco Farrow. I'm with MEMFT. I want to thank you for including this and for working with us on this, and thank Kevin and Regent Buchanan for moving this forward. It really does make a great statement to our faculty and staff, where we look forward to, we've already started working on reinvigorating the retention task force. We certainly look forward to working with you in some shared decision making as we move forward, especially now that we have the governor's budget and we have a flag to get behind, and we will be there with you 100% of the way to make sure that that gets passed and that we move that through the legislature. So thank you, Regent Buchanan, and the rest of you for moving this forward. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Marco. Commissioner Stearns.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to comment. I mentioned this morning when I was describing the listening tours that I had a follow-up idea in the last few weeks, and it came up in several of the sessions of the listening tour. The one in Billings comes to mind, where faculty and others at that session said, we are internal constituents and we don't always have as much communication or involvement. We also heard it, Neil, from you and others this morning in terms of involvement, that your you're working very hard to be involved, and it strikes me that I will, with your help, make the offer to have an internal set of listening sessions to the campuses so that we can go with you to faculty senates, staff senates, so that it's not just your representatives from the various campuses. There are 2 individuals here today from MSU, if they would stand, the 2 professional council members, I see them back here, who have been letting us know we represent a huge group of 900 folks who would very much like to communicate, be included, be part of the solution. Thank you very much for coming, and I was mentioning during the break this same idea. It might be easier than setting up one more meeting inside of a very crowded Board of Regents meeting for us to figure out how 1 or 2 regents and maybe Skype in some others could meet around with your staff groups, faculty groups, employee groups to help follow up Regent Buchanan on this piece and get guidance and communication and try to enrich it. So just wanted to make that offer, and I'm sure my staff are cringing, but I think they know who did most of the traveling on the last listening tour, and they'll think, gee, if she'll do it again, well, it's okay with us. So, which I'd be happy to do. It's very invigorating. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Stearns. Further comment from campuses, students, faculty? Okay. Is it the consensus of the committee then that we'll move this item forward for approval tomorrow? Okay. The next item on our agenda is an information item for weather reasons and a few other. We've actually pulled this item off, so we won't be discussing the healthcare reform overview at this time. We will bring it back at a later meeting. I would add one, though. The Recruitment and Retention Task Force did meet in Missoula a couple weeks ago. Myself, Kevin McCrae, Tom Burgess, Quentin Nyman, Bill Muse, Jim Rempaugh make up that committee. We met for a multi-hour conversation, and so that has been pulled off the shelf and is underway, and we're going to meet again, if not several times before the session, and try to continue to shape that message that we deliver. And that's a lot of what we discussed, is the importance of House Bill 13 and fully funding that, and that gets us a long ways to our recruitment and retention issues that are on the table at this time. And we look forward to another meeting there in support of all of us to move that agenda forward. Any questions on that? Okay. Then we'll move to our consent agenda. The consent agenda has been posted, and just for clarification's sake, it has been posted for over the 48 hours, but there has been 3 changes made to it. We have removed the MSU Great Falls item, or one of the items. We've completed the OCHI item for hiring a new deputy commissioner, and we've completed the MSU Billings item for hiring a new chancellor. So those are on the consent agenda. They have been posted. Board members, I know we want to have some discussion, but I guess we'll start with, is there any public comment on any of these items? Is there any campus or students, faculties that would like to comment on any of the consent items? Okay, board members, then we can certainly feel free to pull any of these items off for discussion, or we could move the consent agenda forward if that's the thought of the committee, and then have a discussion around the items as we see fit. Does that sound like a reasonable plan? So we'll recommend that we move these items forward for tomorrow, and then certainly entertain some comments about the staff consent items. Regent McLean.
Thank you, Chair Christian. First of all, I just think that we have some fabulous hires contained in the consent agenda, and I look to offer a preliminary congratulations to those names contained herein. I do want to express to you, Mr. Chair, and to members of the board, my concern specifically over a couple of things in regards to the consent agenda. First of all, the process, and I've communicated my concerns with this to you and to the commissioner. And I would offer that perhaps we have a meeting of the Staff and Comp Committee to address these processes that we will visit or revisit in the future to discuss some parameters perhaps that we can offer our campuses, offer the commissioner as they seek to recruit high-caliber candidates. Additionally, I have a concern about the impact of specific salary increases contained in the consent agenda, and I'm concerned about the message that these increases in salary may send to our faculty and staff across the state with whom we will be bargaining. And so I hope that we can communicate effectively as a Staff and Comp Committee to address the areas of process perhaps and the parameters in the weeks to come, and I look forward to working with the members of the committee on that.
Thank you, Regent McLean. Regent Buchanan.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'd echo it, and to Regent McLean's credit, I mean, she contacted me about a dozen times trying to pinpoint that consternation about process. And the way I look at it is it's related to a couple of different situations that are similar in nature in that we are in the search process. We're trying to fill positions. The people making those decisions feel it necessary to discuss the salary parameters and need to have that authority. And to me, since we ultimately have the authority and the responsibility of approving any change in salary, having a preliminary discussion before we're at this point in the hiring process, I think is something that we need to add to the process so that we can provide better guidance. It's one of those situations where we're at where we're at now, and I can't be more excited in expressing the same thing that Regent McLean just did about the quality of folks that we're talking about. I mean, we really do I feel lucky that we're able to attract the folks that we are with the fiscal reality that we're facing. At the same time, we have to get better at it so that we are all unified, whether we agree or all agree as a board. If a majority agrees with a direction, then the commissioner or the presidents have their marching orders. And I know that we're all learning a lot as we're in this major shift and transition of leadership across the system. So that is of an issue. And I think at the same time, and I don't know if this discussion, Mr. Chair, is for tomorrow, there are some items in this consent item that I do have questions about relative to salary raises that are not new positions, et cetera. And, maybe I'll save those questions for tomorrow, but those discussions are why we're here. That's why we're a board here, and I think it's important and incumbent upon us to make sure that when we do have a concern, we're in a spot where we're comfortable to express it. What I trust is that this board's motivation is to govern better every time we get together and encourage, support, and look forward to the dialogue that Regent McLean just said or suggested that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Buchanan. Absolutely. I mean, any point that you have questions, I think maybe you can tackle some in the off hours, and then what questions remain, certainly feel free to bring those up tomorrow. That you're exactly right. That is the process. It is a difficult one. I think Regent McLean, your suggestion is very well taken. Some guidance to our commissioner and presidents ahead of time would be extremely helpful. We have them out trying to fill positions, and we have a number of positions that yet remain, and getting that right to the best as we can as a board is I think on everyone's mind. And you know, it's a difficult situation. The recruitment and retention task force grappled with this a lot, but compression and inversion issues are most expressed in these new hire discussions, and we need to continue that conversation. We will continue that conversation. They're difficult, but I think as a board, we are on the same page, and if we can do better to have input at the proper times, it'll create comfort amongst board members. And I certainly pledge to do that. The commissioner and I have spoke. We're on the same page there, and we'll work to give our staff and our commissioner staff better directions from the get-go. Is there further comment or items that we wish to discuss? Regent Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just a little confused about what happens tomorrow. Are we going to engage in the conversation that Angela, Regent McLean and Regent Buchanan have kind of hinted at, for those of us who aren't on the committee? Or is that a subject for a future meeting and we're just going to vote on the items on the agenda tomorrow? I'm just not sure what's happening here, I guess. Thank you.
It's certainly the will of board members. If we have specifics and we want to pull them now and visit about them, we certainly can, or if we want to. Regent Buchanan.
I'll try to articulate a little bit of what's on my mind, Lynn. There's two positions here that are being filled at new salary levels, and the items are one item, and I look at it as two issues. We have successful candidates have gone through an interview process, agreed. We had not yet agreed on as a board to change salary levels. So at this stage of the game, I don't know how we're going to proceed. I mean, I've got reasons for the way I'm going to vote that aren't reflective of my confidence in people, but definitely reflective of my tolerance or my expectations and my belief around what we're doing with our salaries in the system. So I guess I'm spinning around saying I'm probably at the same spot. I think the way I understand it right now is there's one item, and it is to hire and accept the new salary levels there. Related to the U of M consent item, I think that's a separate issue from my perspective. That is an increase in salary, and my questions will be, I'd like to hear why and what justifies it. And I think I've been told that there is some job consolidation added work with a couple of these proposals, and those are the questions that I've got for those items, and I'm glad to ask those now if this is an appropriate time, and it seems like we have the allotted time now to do it in this committee.
I think it's the appropriate time, and we certainly somewhat are meeting as a committee of the whole, and more than welcome your questions. President Engstrom, maybe you can address the U of M one in specific.
Sure. Regent Buchanan, can I just ask, there are two on there, so could you just tell me which one you're asking about, please?
I guess what I'm looking for, and I see that it's described in both of these, that it is a change in title. And I guess I would like to see, explain to me what's the change in role, what's the change in leadership expectations that justifies a salary raise.
Okay, Regent Buchanan, members of the board, the first one is Perry Brown, who is moving from his old position of associate provost to the position of provost. And so the duties of the provost are considerably different than the duties of the interim associate provost that he held before. And so the salary is moving to the level of the provost salary. So it's a different job. It's not a raise for the same position. It's a totally different job that he's filling. So the new salary is set at the salary that I was making as provost when I vacated the position. So that's that one. Okay. The second one, Arlene Walker-Andrews, is the associate provost, and I did request the addition of $5,000 there to reflect an increase in duties, a change of duties. As you know, the Northwest Commission on Colleges and Universities has changed the way it does accreditation. Well, maybe I shouldn't say, as you know, the commission has changed the way it does accreditation so that now instead of a once every 10-year process that occurs that we just went through, the accreditation process now becomes an ongoing process where there are interactions with the Northwest Commission on essentially an annual basis with major reports due on a 7-year cycle at year 1, year 3, year 5, and year 7. And so my estimation there is that we need a person who, instead of picking somebody once every 10 years to prepare that report, we need somebody to stay on top of that accreditation in an ongoing sense. And so I've added that duty to associate Provost Arlene Walker Andrews in addition to the duties that she was serving before. So that's why I've requested that.
Mr. Chairman, that is not vacating a current position, that is adding additional duties?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Further questions on the U of M staff and comp items, consent agenda items B? Committee members or board members, for that matter, are there more questions on specific items? So committee members, are we prepared to move these items forward then for tomorrow? Okay. Then I believe we're ready to take public comment on, at least during the staff and comp committee meeting. Is there public comment on items not on the agenda? Then we'll adjourn this committee meeting, and I believe the only remaining item on our agenda for today is public comment. So is there any public comment on any items not on today's agenda? Please.
Hi, my name is Michelle Mitchell, and I am representing the Montana Indian Education Association today. I am the newest board member, so I don't know if this is my initiation or if it's because I talk a lot, but I'm here and I don't know how this is done. Do I hand this out myself?
Pull the mic up a little higher.
Okay. I'll tell you a little bit about myself while those get passed around. I'm a grad, 2001, and I have my master's in education from Cal State Hayward. I'm a Salish woman from the Flathead Indian Reservation, and I have two brilliant, beautiful Salish and Kootenai daughters. I was elected to the board this last summer. One of the positions was vacated because one of our board members moved out of state. And so then I was nominated and elected. So I'll read the letter that we have prepared for you today. Dear Chairman Christian and members of the Montana Board of Regents, on behalf of the Montana Indian Education Association, I would like to take a few minutes to invite you to share in our commitment to improving educational opportunities for American Indian students in the state of Montana, P20. We thank you for your work in Indian education, and we're very pleased with the opening of the new Native American Center at the University of Montana. It's beautiful. We welcome the new president, Dr. Royce Engstrom with the University of Montana, and Dr. Wade Cruzado with the Montana State University, and look forward to working with you in strengthening Indian education in our great state. But even with the many successes we look back on, the Montana Indian Education Association as an advocacy organization is deeply concerned with the success of American Indian students at all levels of the education system. At a recent board meeting, we were presented with data concerning American Indian college going and graduation data. From this report, it became very clear that there is an American Indian achievement gap that exists in higher ed as well. Over a 10-year period, American Indian students going to state institutions of higher education increased by a mere 0.5%. This is not acceptable, and we hope to work together to make real change in this area. The following is the data from the university's website. I also attached to the back of it the actual report itself. In addition to the need for addressing the issues brought forth by the data above, the following are 3 areas that we would like to ask for your advocacy for. Indian education for all is meant for all of Montana's educational systems, including the university system. We appreciate the efforts that have been taken by the university system on Indian education for all in teacher education programs, but in order to meet the intent of this constitutional promise Resources are needed to support all the units of the university system in their implementation on their respective campuses. We urge you to actively support and seek additional funding for Indian Education for All as a part of the university system budget. The Montana Indian Education Association also requests that the position of Director of American Indian Minority Achievement be increased to a full-time position, and we're also very proud of Casey. It is vital that the American Indian voice be present if positive change is to occur. The ability for this position to accomplish its intent cannot be accomplished if it continues to be a 9-month position. Additionally, the position needs funded at a level such that the salary will be adequate to recruit a highly qualified, skilled educator and researcher. The Montana Indian Education Association supports state funding of Montana's tribal colleges for non-beneficiary students at an equitable level with ongoing funding for state 2-year college students. MIEA recognizes the tribal colleges as an integral part of the state's higher education community and asks that the Board of Regents and the Governor include ongoing funding by the state of Montana for non-beneficiary students on an equitable level as the funding per student at state 2-year colleges. I've included copies of the Montana Indian Education Association 2010 resolutions that are pertinent to the Board of Regents for your review. In closing, I would like to take an opportunity to invite all of you to attend the 2011 Montana Indian Education Association Annual Conference in Great Falls on April 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th. All of the conference information is available online at www.mtiea.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Do you have any questions?
Mr. Chairman, maybe just a quick comment. I'm actually literally exchanging emails with Acting Director of Indian Affairs, Lisa Evers. The Governor received your letter several months ago. Just to bring you up to speed, within the executive budget proposal that we've made, the at-risk component is reinstated for K-12. We have included the full funding for non-beneficiary students at the tribal colleges at $3,024. We have maintained the at-risk, or not the at-risk, the Indian Achievement Gap financing at K-12. We have also, what was the other one you guys wanted? Anyway.
Indian Ed for All in the university system?
The letter that we got earlier didn't reflect that, but at K-12 it was maintained, and we've also been working with the chair and the members of the regents to make sure that the higher ed position is restored to the full 12-month. So that's where the budget as presented stands.
Okay, thank you. And that's the budget that the governor presented yesterday or day before? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Regent Pease.
Yes, Ms. Mitchell, thank you very much for bringing this material to us. Montana Indian Education Association has quite a record of presenting to the regents. In fact, I'm not sure that we've ever had a meeting without that, so it's very important to have that perspective. Of course, Joyce Silverthorne is the person that has come in many previous meetings, but good to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
There was one other. Regent McLean.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, and thank you for your report. I think it was at our May meeting where one of the board members asked the superintendent of public instruction what we as a board could do to support the Indian Education for All efforts on our campuses. And a couple of things I think are worth noting that are happening, and that we could be instrumental perhaps as a board in promoting, and one of those is the Indian Education for All in its implementation in our classes across our campuses, across the Montana University system, and monitor and ask for campus reports on that in a similar way as they do at the K-12 level to ensure that those components are being met outside of the educator prep programs that you mentioned. Additionally, I will tell you there is a remarkable professor at the University of Montana Law School, Maylin Smith, who acts as an ambassador for the university and goes and speaks to high school students about tribal law and tribal government, which is very complex. And so I think there's some great things happening with her and at the law school, and I think in our high school classrooms across at least the western part of the state that I know of. And then finally, I just want to point out that in regards to the additional budget authority that was requested by the University of Montana, there was a request to allocate funds for increased waivers related to Native American students. And so we're eyeing some things, making efforts to close the achievement gap, and I'm confident that through continued dialogue and partnerships with you, that we can move forward positively and impact student learning and grow those graduation rates. So thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further public comment on items not on today's agenda? Any further public comment? Okay, then we will recess until tomorrow morning at 8:30. And I want to remind everybody that we have a reception this evening hosted by Provost Perry Brown and Shirley Brown. And do you want to tell us where that's at?
Sure, it's in the Performing Arts TV building, which is right across the street from the Adams Center. So it's on the north side of campus, right across from the Adams Center where we play basketball and all that kind of thing. It's right in there in the lobby area, and the two galleries are right there. So we want to see those paintings that you got introduced to this morning.
Follow-up question, if I may. Perry, is there a chance that we didn't think we would be adjourned at 4 instead of 5. Is there a chance that it is open yet?
It is open.
But maybe the reception.
The stuff isn't there yet.
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you.
But the galleries are open.
Thank you. Yeah, we're ahead of schedule, but we're going to recess anyway. And it should be credit given. Regent Barrett finished in record time. Thank you.